Good afternoon and welcome to the Council. I'm your host, Charlie Pacello, and we are on a Saturday today, but we're having a very, very special event today. Our guest is absolutely amazing. We're going to be diving into it here very shortly. But I just want to do a quick shout out to KUHSdenver.com. KUHS is the stream. We are broadcasting here from the beautiful city of Denver, Colorado. We are the #1 streaming service all in Colorado, and we are committed to providing our listeners with the best programming in the world. Outstanding talk shows, DJs in the studio, and we have some of the most talented TV, radio DJs out there, and hosts, personalities, professionals, and programming you will find anywhere in the internet or traditional media. Our reach continues to go beyond just Colorado. We're touching people all across this nation and all around the world. People tune into the Council from about 40 different countries, even more, on 6 different continents. We thank each and every one of you every week who tune into the Council for trusting us to bring you the best programming we can each and every week to you. The Council has gone into collaboration with the Trauma Sensitive Awareness Foundation, and we are doing a very special summit called the Veteran Summit Special Series here on KUHS TV Radio. And this is part 1 of a special 10-part interview series dedicated to providing veterans and their loved ones with information, hope, inspiration, and healing. This is the first of its kind summit that it's going to be exploring cutting-edge treatments and alternative therapies for PTS, TBI, moral injury, sleep disturbance, family conflict, emotional trauma, and so much more. Mental health experts, veterans, and their advocates are going to provide answers and resources and solutions to bring all of our warriors home. We're starting the dialogue. And we've been starting the dialogue for about 7 shows. This is our 7th show, so come on and enjoy the conversation. Learn more about part 2 that's going to be debuting in November. And we're doing this every Friday through September 25th, right here on KUHSdenver.com. Well, today we're going to be talking about traumatic brain injury. And I just wanted to, before we introduce my guest for today's show, I looked up some of the numbers that of worldwide totals for our Department of Defense members of the service that are being affected by traumatic brain injury. And worldwide totals is about 383,947. That's the 2018 totals that were part of the Department of Defense. And so there's a huge number of our veterans out there that are dealing with this issue, from mild conditions where it's a confused and disoriented state that lasts about 24 hours, a loss of consciousness for about 30 minutes, memory loss for about 24 hours, to severe, which is characterized by confusion and disoriented state, which lasts more than 24 hours. Loss of consciousness of more than 24 hours, or memory loss for more than 7 days. And this, you can also go into penetrating TBI, which is an open head injury. And that's where the scalp or the skull or the dura mater are penetrated. It's an issue that has been troubling for so many, and it has led to a lot of people, unfortunately, taking their life because they didn't think there was any hope out there to relieve them of the pain that they've been going through and the suffering that they've been going through. And it is from the people that we are trying to help. We want to help the people so that they know that there's alternative methodologies out there, alternative therapies out there that can help them that this doesn't have to be a permanent injury, that it doesn't have to be something that they're left with for the rest of their lives, taking a lot of medications, trying to manage the symptoms that they're dealing with because of the TBI that they experience. So today we are talking to someone who has experienced all of this and has come back from the brink. He's got a message to share with us that should inspire you and give you hope for a promising future out there for many of you that are suffering from this very debilitating injury. I'd like to introduce to you my guest, Andrew Marr. He's United States Army Special Forces, retired. He's a husband, father, retired Special Forces Green Beret, entrepreneur, and best-selling co-author of Tales from the Blast Factory, a brain-injured Special Forces Green Beret's journey back from the Brink. That's this book right here. It's amazing. I had the privilege to be able to read it before the show. Really, really incredible journey and outstanding book. I can't recommend it more highly. His book has been turned into a full-featured documentary titled Quiet Explosions, Healing the Brain, by a 2-time Emmy-winning director to include a 3-time Academy Award winner contributing to the production efforts as well. He is also the co-founder of the Warrior Angels Foundation with his brother Adam Marr, whose mission is to help other U.S. service members and veterans receive the same level of care he received. Andrew lives with his wife Becky, the love of his life, and their 7 children in the Los Angeles area. Their website is www.waftbi.org. That's www.waftbi.org. Andrew, welcome to the council.
Charlie, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, after the journey that you have been on, sir, it is an honor that you're here. I'm so excited to get started into this conversation and the message of hope that you have for so many people. It's incredible. Before we get at it, I want to get right into it. Could you share just a little bit about your background, and Andrew, and why you joined the military? And of course, why did you choose the Green Berets?
Yeah, I grew up in Texas, graduated high school in 2000. My life revolved around being an athlete, primarily in football. As they say, football is king. Mm-hmm. Well, I got a college scholarship to play football, played at Belen Junior College and then Texas A&M Kingsville, and was very much pursuing the things that I wanted to pursue in life. But after wrapping up my undergrad, had to look on to, what's next to evolution. The NFL wasn't calling, so there wasn't a promising career in that end. So I really looked hard and deep about where I thought would be the best next thing for me. Now, while I was in college, I was able to pursue, like I said, the very thing that I wanted to be pursuing with my life. When that was over, I felt that I always had this voice inside me at the same time that there was gentlemen, men my own age, that were putting their life on the line for the freedoms and the liberties that we get to experience in this country, and that always was there at the back of my mind. So when my future became open, so to speak, that was just the next best thing to do, as I saw. And why specifically the military? Why specifically Special Forces? Well, quite frankly, there's no greater test than to test oneself in combat. Mm-hmm. The only way you can experience that is to go out there and live it. So somewhat ignorant perspective, but I wanted to test myself in combat because I believed in the mission, and I believed, there takes certain type of individuals to put it on the line to defend, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to defend the incredible freedoms that we have here. Right to express yourself, freedom of speech, things like that. Those were important to me. So that's how I segued into the military. Going back again into Special Forces, I looked at all the different special operations arena. I liked that the ODAs, as they call them in Special Forces, the Operational Attachment Alphas, was put together in a very similar team structure that I had known my entire life, and how they were kind of masters of unconventional warfare, working by, with, and through other indigenous forces to, help solve a problem at the end of the day. And I thought that would be a good carryover for what I've been doing, and I could, volunteer those skill sets. And came over, went right into Special Forces, and I took to it like a fish in water.
Well, I think one of the things that you mentioned is that, this love of service and wanting to protect those freedoms and liberties and all the things that we take for granted. I mean, that was the reason I joined in the service as well. I mean, that was just something that was a part of me. It was, you can't even describe why you feel that way. You just do. And my dad was in the Special Forces in the Navy. He was a Navy SEAL. So I certainly understand that passion, that desire and willingness to serve on the highest level possible. And in your book, you have this beautiful thing, and I'd like to touch on it before we get into your journey here. You mentioned a passage in here, and it's right there at the beginning of the book, where you talk about your standard of performance, and that this had been a guiding force in your life. Whenever you needed it, you were going through a challenge or a circumstance that demanded the most of you, I would love for you to be able to share it with the audience and how it has served your life.
Yeah, I think we all as humans, we need something to aim at. We need that guiding light and that purpose. And that's one aspect of it. So the second aspect of it is actually, how do I ensure that my thoughts and my actions and my communication efforts are in alignment with my highest ideals? Mm-hmm. And it really came forth more after I became a father, but it became imperative to me that, what I do has consequences, and I want to make the most out of my time, and I would like to live my life the way of the warrior, as if everything I did mattered, and I put the highest standard that I could on it. And for me, it's pretty simple. It's to be able to look myself in the mirror at the end of the day and know that I contributed and performed to the very best of my abilities, that I left everything I could out there, that I learned, I grew, I served, and I loved to the very best, and if it's time to go, I want to be able to look myself in the mirror and say, I put it out there, I left it all in the field, and we can go on and get on with it. And very rarely, if ever, do I live up to that, but that is the pursuit of something that I think allows me to be the best version of myself, which I think that's what we're all doing. So that was the importance of me, Charlie, to actually codify a standard of performance on how to conduct myself in all matters of life.
And I think it's something that I think for all of us that are trying to live the best that we can, and that teach our kids the same thing, those early values that you take with you. Being honest, being truthful, being forthright, treating others the way you want to be treated, all those things that we inculcate early on. When they're tested, we cling on to those things. We don't realize how important they can be until we're tested. And you certainly, my gosh, Andrew, you were tested like nobody that I have met yet. And I would love for you to be able to start getting into your experience. But first, could you explain to the audience better than I did what traumatic brain injury is, how people can get it, and does it affect just military members?
Yeah, great question. And again, you kind of broke it off in a really good way. You have what you call a major traumatic brain injury, and that's like you referenced earlier. That's a open wound, a fracture, massive bleeding or hemorrhaging. Like you can look at an individual and say, oh dear God, that was a massive head injury. So that's classified as a major traumatic brain injury, and it's usually also accompanied by pretty prolonged loss of consciousness. Then what we have is what's called a minor traumatic brain injury, and there's nothing really minor about it, but it's just a classification system. And that's meaning that there's some type of blow, jolt to the head from some external factor that's caused that brain to shake. And the brain is housed in fluid, and it's encased with your skull, and it's floating in cerebral spinal fluid. So any blow to that, it can actually do what they call coup, counter coup, hit the front, hit the back, or hit the side and go to another side. Well, by definition, every one of those are a head injury. And then if you get into a car accident, a slip and fall, acceleration, deacceleration, fall from a ladder, playing athletics, normal daily activities, or in the military setting, any type of frequent munitions training, explosives, and then we get into special operations where our guys are in very close proximity to surgical blasts throughout the entirety of his career. So all of these things can cause that brain to shake in there, and it's that explosive energy, it's that force that kind of is blown out in a 360-degree area, and it's moving energy. So that's going to then have the ability to cause micro damage or tearing to some of the important parts of the brain. Well, they're all important, but what that can do, so we have two parts then, Charlie. We have phase one of the injury, and that is the external blow causing that brain to shake. And there's different variations of the seriousness of that, to like, I just got a little bit of ringing, I got my bell rung, so to speak, or, it's no big thing at all, and we just keep going about our day. The second part, phase two of the injury, is the silent part. It's the deadly part. It's also the invisible part. And here's what that entails. It entails that because there was those micro tears from the brain cells being, we'll just say, ripped open a little bit by the sheer force, that chemistry starts to leak. And now we have chemistry that was only supposed to be transported in very specific ways out in the open, and that can be problematic. And it can be this very slow, insignificant leak, and then that can grow over time to become very chronic. And what we're talking about here is a process called inflammation or neuroinflammation. And when that becomes chronic, when that becomes something that has been turned on, the chemistry has been turned off, and now it's not turned on, it's not being turned off, we have the makings for a very big problem, because that interrupts the cell-to-cell communication. It can cause those brain cells to die. It can cause you to become deficient in all the important chemistry that runs the body. So, that's a little bit of different classification of head injuries as we know it. And it's important, Charlie, because oftentimes it's not just this one serious blow to the head and I have a minor traumatic brain injury, and it's easy to tell at that time, and I know to go get treatment. Oftentimes, it's something that happens that's rather inconspicuous and not thought to be a big deal, and the individual doesn't become symptomatic till months or even years later. And again, that's what that slow, insidious part of the leaking of that chemistry. So, and again, like we've seen this in football very many times now, and it's crystal clear. We take these subconcussive hits to the head over and over and over in a person's career, and they have, when they die, something that's a chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, which is really a fancy word for a brain injury. But we know that it doesn't take those just one big, huge blows. It can be the entire recordings of somebody's history of those subconcussive blows that can cause somebody to become symptomatic and their life to become completely derailed from having any quality of life. And the reason that's difficult for a lot of reasons is if somebody becomes symptomatic and there's no physical injuries or visible wounds on their body, so it becomes at that point very difficult to diagnose. And that's when we can get in the troubling phase of symptom management. But that's some background overview on TBI. Anything you want to parse out there, Charlie? I want to jump kind of into the story.
Well, yeah, I would love. Just it was when you talk about it, you mentioned football players, and I know that. Shoot, I played football for many, many years. You talked about it. So even an injury that you had, and then we'll get into your story, even an injury that you may have had, like a concussion or something that happened where you were knocked out, because I know that happened because I tried to play linebacker, and I had a much smaller physique. You guys were a lot bigger than I was, but, but I had a big heart, and so I would hit. But I remember having some of those sometimes. Could that, just having one of those experiences, create, you were talking about that there's a rupture that happens or there's a tear that happens in the brain. Can even just having one of those create in the long term a TBI, a traumatic brain injury?
In short, yes. The NFL did a study and they released it several years back, and they said that if a player was to have even one concussion on the field, they were something on the order of 17 times more likely to develop early stage Alzheimer's between the ages of 30 to 49. So that's with one concussion, puts you at a 17 times more likely risk of developing early stage Alzheimer's.
Whoa, whoa, that's unbelievable. Holy moly!
Not my number, not my study. That's the NFL, and
yeah.
So I don't have the reference on top of my head. That's an easy thing to go fact check.
Holy moly! I didn't realize that. And I think that as people become more aware of the severity of the issue, the problem of the issue, the pervasiveness of it, that will start to make better choices in the future about some of the things that we do. But nonetheless, I want you to go into your tours in Afghanistan, and you served honorably. There are multiple tours. What you did, my goodness, just much respect, sir. And I would just love if you could take us back a little bit to the event or events that led to your traumatic brain injury.
Yeah. So I was in going back. So I was in Special Forces, like you said, because of the that level of specialization and what that job requirement calls for. Those type of trained individuals are in and around countless explosions. That just comes with the territory. Mm-hmm. Many times we're on the proactive end, but you're still receiving that recidivative blast wave, and many times we can be on the unfortunate end of that. So I was one of my roles was being a breacher. So I would put explosive charges, the doors, windows, walls, whatever the situation called for, and we'd get back to what we call a minimum safe distance and blow those charges. But you don't just go and say, hey, I'm going to do this in combat under gunfire in real life situation without have done it hundreds of times in a training environment, so you can become proficient to do that at the highest level with the highest stakes. So for anybody who does that in the real world in a combat scenario has probably gone through it 100 times minimum. And I was no different. So because I had played football from the age of 10 all the way through college, I had a number of blows to the head, but had never had any issues. Go into Special Forces, and what are you doing? You're jumping out of planes, you're shooting all the time, you're doing explosive work, you're doing combatives, jiu-jitsu, things like this to become the best that you can be at your job so you can perform when the time comes to perform and accomplish the mission and, as important, bring the people to the left and right of you home. So, with that puts you at high risk. That just comes with the territory. High risk of being on the receiving end or having multiple head injuries. So there's no way that we can accurately say, well, this is the number of head injuries this individual had. We can just say they were exposed to an environment that was conducive to allowing, these type of things to become more susceptible to. So I went from very resilient to, because of the course of all those things I just listed out, becoming less and less resilient internally. So being able to bounce back from things like that. So multiple rotations through Afghanistan and other theaters like everybody else. And my last deployment was in 2013, and 6-7 month deployment. It was the most fiercest combat of my career. We were out in Wardak province, and it was wild, wild west out there. And it was great from the operational experience and full spectrum of going out there and actually getting to do your job and to see a real difference taking place on the ground and seeing that actually benefit a community in real time. So it was very rewarding in that sense. Never had any issues or symptoms on that trip that I know of, because we get in such a state when you're in that high level of operations that your job, you've done it so many times, you don't really have to think about it because it's not new to you. It's hard-brained. It's wired into your system. You know how to operate. There's some variables there, but for the most part, you're prepared to do those variables. You're almost on autopilot. That allows you to make bigger, more crucial decisions when the time comes. So, I was involved in one significant explosion there that did knock me out. As a matter of fact, that was the only time I ever lost consciousness in my entire Special Forces career, but it was brief. And I came back to, and rocket RPGs are coming in and bullets are whizzing and flying by. And at first I didn't know where, I had no concept of time, myself, space, no spatial awareness. I thought I was inside of a building that had just was in an earthquake or something. I literally had no idea. I just came to, and I'm this point of consciousness in a completely black setting where I have no visibility. That's because of the explosion, and I was, in like ground zero, so to speak. But as when bullets start to fly and I start to get some more awareness about me, like I said, I just go right back into doing the job, doing what we needed to do. And in that case, it was, getting the team that was on that X, so to speak, and breaking contact and fighting back, to our team so we could live to play another day, and that was the case. And then we went on about business as usual on our normal op tempo, about maybe the midway point of that rotation. So another 3 to 4 months of hard combat, on the end of that. Got to the end of that, came back home, and was absolutely fine and had no symptoms till about 6 months after my return from that last trip. And the first things that I started to experience where I was like, okay, man, like this is different, was twofold. One, I had a complete loss of libido, and then two, a complete loss of energy for somebody who is a very high energy, individual. I'm not talking like, oh, I'm having trouble, getting out of the bed in the morning. Like, I'm talking about not having the physical ability, it felt like, to do anything and being relegated to the bed. So with the loss of the libido, it was very troubling in the home front because I've been gone for a number of months. Now I come home, my wife is beautiful. I couldn't be more attracted to her then, and even so now, baby. And that became very, difficult for her because, and out there, you can understand her perspective. Her thinking is like, we've never experienced anything like this. This in my head means one of two things. One, he's not attracted to me anymore, or two, there must be somebody else. And we had to kind of navigate that terrain as I'm starting to now have some new and difficult things that I'm experiencing internally. And now my mindset is like, man, this is great. Like, I come home from a very psychological and physically taxing deployment. I'll just leave it at that. And then have to come into this scenario here at the house. I'm like, this is the last thing I need. And then it was like more symptoms started to present themselves. So at first it was more with, I would say, like my psychology. And again, my entire life history, very optimistic, very upbeat, very, let's look for the best out of the situation. Let's figure out how to solve this problem. Let's be proactive. Let's be solutions based. And all of a sudden, I started to become overwhelmed by a newfound depression. And this was entirely foreign to me. And I also felt I couldn't put my finger on it because here I am, I'm in my early 30s. I'm at the tip of the spear as far as what I want to do professionally. I've earned my at the table, so to speak. Married to the woman of my dreams. We have the family we always want. I'm not hung up on anything I did operationally. And now I'm walking around as if to find out my ODA had been murdered this morning. That was what I felt like inside. Or to wake up and to find out that your family had just been murdered. How do you rationalize that? I'm like, I don't have no reason to feel this. I don't want to feel like this. This doesn't make any sense. So that was the first type of thing I think, like, man, like there's some things going on here that's not adding up. There's not a scratch on my body. And then I started to become plagued with anxiety, and I thought before being on the receiving end of these things that this was just a weak-minded person's problem. Right. I thought, I'm a mentally tough person. Like, This doesn't happen to mentally tough people. This doesn't happen to Green Berets. And then it started to happen to me. And that just shows the ignorance on my part. But that's where my mind was at. And I started to experience it firsthand. And again, this wasn't a conscious decision where I was saying, hey man, let me go out in public and let me break down and have a panic attack in the weight room of our gym. Let me do this at the grocery store. Let me do this in front of my children at home. Like, that wasn't a choice. And it was like a runaway gun when it came on. The thing just had to run its course. And I just kind of had to sit back and bear witness to this occurrence going through me that I am observing but have no conscious control over. Started to think that I was actually losing my mind. And because it's happening on a fairly routine basis now. And so it was so foreign to me, Charlie, that the only thing that I knew to do, well, one, I'm not going to talk about it because we don't do that. And then two, the only thing I could really think to do at that point was to drink, because that was the only thing for a short-term strategy that would stop this incredible anxiety, panic attack, and would kind of numb that out. And because it became so frequent, I had to turn my drinking up to drinking from the moment I woke up in the morning till the moment I passed out in the evening, as also trying to somewhat be a functional operator and have a wife and child. And I think it got what made you raise your hand and ask for help? I got to the point where I was drinking so much, drinking and driving. I'm talking about drinking going into work, drinking leaving work, pulling over at the Class 6, for anybody who's out there as military, that's the liquor store that we have on base, getting it, buying a bottle of whatever, and just drinking it straight from the bottle as I'm driving home, and I'm crying, as well. But I realized at that point, two things. One, at that point, driving, I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I didn't even care. I was like, it doesn't matter. And then two, I realized, when I had some small moments of clarity, like, this behavior is absolutely unacceptable, and it doesn't seem like I'm in any control over it. And that's the point I went to the command. I'm like, listen, I don't know what to tell you guys, but this is the state of affairs, and this is where I'm at. I've been around a lot of blasts. I don't know how else to connect this, but I'm not hung up on anything I've done operationally. I want to keep doing what I've been doing, because that drives a tremendous sense of meaning and purpose in my life. And I'd like to just figure out how we solve this problem and get back to it. And so that was kind of the first, the beginnings of how this very, dark force reared its ugly head and just, came close to obliterating me and my family.
Incredible. And it was so uncharacteristic of your experience as a person, as a Green Beret, to come back, and all of a sudden you see your whole life starting to kind of fall apart. The loss of the libido, the loss of the anger episodes, the drinking and driving, all of those things were totally uncharacteristic of who you are as a person than who you were before you got the TBI. And it seems to me that is a common pattern that a lot of veterans have who have experienced a traumatic brain injury. And when the military was able to finally, examine you and look at you and talk to you, what did they diagnose you with? I mean, in your book you talk about, like, you had 20 different diagnoses. I mean, seems like they were just reaching. They really didn't know what was going on with you. What they were trying to do was to pin something on with you and hope that it stuck.
Yeah, as things evolved, I started to become and have a whole multitude of symptomatology. So in addition to loss of libido, energy, depression, anxiety, like you said, this overwhelming occurrence of rage, and that was not a socially appropriate response to have by any means. Like, the situation just did not dictate a response like that, but yet I would produce one, and with sometimes disastrous consequences. Again, it seemed like I was just a a passenger to this other individual that was going off on it. Then I started to really have issues with my cognition, and I'm probably already having problems with my cognitive processing and obviously my ability to make good decisions, but that became more and more pronounced as I went from having a rough time with medium-term and short-term memory. For instance, and a lot of people are hearing this, and I'm hoping lights are going off because I hear this a lot of times, but driving home, finding myself pulled over on the side of the road, and it's again like I came to in that explosion that I was talking about earlier, and I just have no idea where I'm at. I have no understanding of my surroundings. I have no understanding of where I'm going, and it takes me, 3, 4, 5 minutes to kind of figure out, like, okay, like what am I? Where am I at? What am I doing? What's going on? That's an incredibly lonely and difficult experience to have when it starts occurring in frequent intervals. So I started to lose the ability to recall everyday normal vocabulary that's typical to my job skills, vocabulary that's typical just in communicating, trying to say, hey, I'm going to pick up, could you pass me this pen? And I couldn't figure out how to articulate that this was a pen. I had to go get some x-rays, for instance, and they handed me the robe to put on. And I could not figure out how to put my arms in it. Like, it just didn't register. I'm actually trying to put it through my legs because I couldn't do the processing to figure out, like, okay, this is a robe. This is where my arms go. It's open in the back. Put it on, tie it, go have the x-rays. And my mind just couldn't process that. And then, of course, when I couldn't do that, I become abusive and violent to the people that are around there actually trying to help me because I'm frustrated and I can't understand it. So, these other cognitive processes that I've been able to be, at the forefront of, at least from an academic and a professional level, now it's out the window. And I was like, I was once an intelligent person, and it seems like I can't do. So now I can't focus anymore. I am unable to focus my attention to read a sheet of paper, and I can't understand it for the life of me. And like I said, when I was in short-term memory, we were at one of those neuropsychological assessments where they put 7 basic shapes in front of you. You look at each one. I think you get 20 seconds or maybe 10 seconds, and then you recite 7 simple shapes. I couldn't recall after one shape, and we did that about 5 times in a row. Again, so these are just the things. And then I started to have the physiological problems. So I went from having, a class 3 or 4 headache on a scale of 1 to 10 to having a migraine every day. And those migraines would then drive blurry vision. It would blur my vision, and then I would go into double vision. And from there, I started to have balance issues and all these other type of chronic health conditions that just started to arise. And again, like, if you looked at me, I looked like the epitome of a healthy individual without a visible wound or scar on my body. So it just doesn't make sense. So, my command wanted nothing to support me. They didn't know how to deal with that situation. So, they did the best they could. They said, okay, man, like, we need to see some specialists because, we're out of the domain of what we know to do. So I started to go and seeing a lot of different specialists, and this is when I started to become really unhappy with the military medical model, so to speak. And I want to caveat that with saying I think everybody's doing the absolute best they can.
I agree.
And I hope that came across in my book.
Yeah.
No, I'm not trying to throw dirt on anything. But what we're hopefully doing, Charlie, by having these conversations is not just calling out what we have problems with, but talking about some viable solutions, which I promise there's some solutions-based conversations that to be had here with Charlie and I talking. But that was where I was unhappy. I'm seeing all these different specialists. So you have a problem with vision, go to the vision doctor. You have a problem with your head, you go to the neurologist. Go see the psychologist because you're having anxiety and depression. And so I had where it got to be like 6 or 7 different specialists all highly specialized in their individual areas. But it became apparent to me that there was no cross communication between these specialists. Two, it seemed to be like each specialist looked at a piece of a pie, like they had this sliver of it, and if there wasn't something that they could identify or pin as maybe being the underlying condition or a condition that contributed these symptoms, it was just like, well, let's manage symptoms, let's check the mark here, and let's send you on down the road to the next office. And another thing that really got at me was it would take 2 to 4 weeks to get an appointment, and then another 2 to 4 weeks to get a follow-up. What happened in that appointment? And I was like, man, this like nothing is happening in the time and fashion that it needs to drive a proper, one, assessment, and then two, a treatment program. So that was kind of the state of affairs there. And I was put on about 6 medications, some anti-anxiety and antidepressive, and some to help you sleep, and some to help you wake up, and some for anti-seizure and things of this nature. And then I started to notice, man, like I was having some disastrous side effects from those medications. And now I look back at it and I realize like there's no risk matrix, a drug risk matrix seems to me that is being assessed when you're putting an individual on all of these different pharmaceuticals, and that absolutely interrupt the body's ability to process and function. So we were able to go, so it became apparent, like, hey man, like nothing's working here for Andrew. I found out about NICO, the National Intrepid Center of Excellence. Am I thinking that National? Yes, Intrepid Center of NICO. And that was in Walter Reed. And that's the Department of Defense's premier establishment to help our service members identify and treat their injuries, and then they work with your your providers back at your base on a treatment plan. So I was very happy to get out there. It's a 4-week program there in Bethesda at Walter Reed, and really, man, like that was for me like the nail in the coffin for my career, because I was able to get all this high level testing done. And the takeaway was when I brought back that medical analysis to my unit, it was like, hey man, Andrew, based off of this large body of work and everything now that's in your medical file, we cannot afford to have one more blow to the head. Like it could be fatal. We don't know what that would be able to do. You know what I mean? And I went from 6 medications when I got there to being on 13. So I felt like, in one way I was vindicated because, there was no doubt that, what I was experiencing was real. It wasn't just in my mind. And that would have been a lot about the internal struggle I was having. I was like, man, am I for some reason just like I'm breaking inside and this is the result? And what if they don't find anything? What if they don't find anything and I have all these other problems and we can't identify, what to do about any of them? At least at that point, it became very real, even though the solution set to me wasn't a solution set. But at that point, I was like, okay, well, at least we know that, I'm not making this up. It's validated and but that put me on a path to being retired the Army at that point.
Well, it sounds very much like you were fighting a war within, that it was a daily battle that so many veterans, thousands of veterans are going through, and you're just trying to find answers. There's something wrong. And just from what you've described, just the courage that it takes to get through that, and for your family to be there behind you and to stand beside you and your wife and children. I mean, it takes a toll. But we want to get in the last half of the show to talk about some of the hope that's behind it. And I would love for you to be able to kind of talk about how you came to the hormonal therapy and the Gordon protocol. What brought you to, what was your journey to getting from this point here, where you were at your lowest? What was that turning point, and then what led you to this amazing therapy that I believe is called the Gordon Protocol, correct?
Yeah, correct. I had gotten to this place where I'd become overwhelmed by everything that was happening, and I had become wrapped up and consumed by the conditions in my life, and almost thinking that it was very unfair that I had to live this, and I was dealt this hand. And that was my mindset. I'm living this unfair reality, causing disastrous effects at home in my family, seeing how that is playing out and the damage that it's having on my wife and my children, and being at a point where you put a gun in your mouth and you think, like, the best decision I think I could make would be to pull this trigger right here, because at least that would end the suffering that they're having to endure. That's when I realized so many other people in Special Forces, how they had got to that point, because we also had a tough time internalizing how people could take their own life, and it wasn't until I got to that point where I understood it. My son became very ill. He was 13 months at the time. I actually missed his birth on my previous deployment, and he had what's called a lymphatic malformation. So he had this huge growth in his neck. Now, it was about the size of a kidney bean, and he had an infection, and it swelled up to about the size of a baseball. He had about six different surgeries, and it was a very traumatic process. When that first happened and we took him to the emergency room, my wife is 9 months pregnant with our boy Jojo. My son Jace there, 13 months old. He's having trouble breathing. He has a huge growth that has occurred in his neck over the span of about 4 hours. I've had this incredible pain in my calf that's going on for a couple of days, but we just drive on. So we get to the emergency room. We get my son in there. He goes into emergency surgery. My wife, Becky, goes into labor to give birth to our son, and I'm going back and forth between like the third floor and the fifth floor of the hospital, and at this point my leg is not working because it's in so much pain, so I'm dragging my leg back and forth to go and try to be with both as much as I can. Our boy Jace comes through the surgery, and he's in a relatively good state. My wife is able to give birth to Jojo and one of my sons, and he's in very good shape. They're in good shape, and the care team actually at this point is able to talk me into going and getting imaging on my calf. So they do take an image of it. They find what's called a deep vein thrombosis. It's a blood clot, and it's so massive, and I had sat on it so long that it broke off, and then it traveled into both lungs. It's called a bilateral pulmonary embolism. He said at this point this has a very high mortality rate, and we were honestly not sure if you're going to make it. And I had been drinking through the whole ordeal, because that's just how I dealt with things. So I was pouring airplane whiskey bottles into drinks I was drinking. So I actually thought that was very funny, and I was like, hey man, if this thing's going to kill me, you guys got to get in line, because there's a lot of people that want claim to that title. But they rushed me in there. I'm in the hospital for the better part of 2 weeks. Come out on the other end of the blood clots. My son, like I said, had 6 or 7 surgeries on his neck. So I remember being there, it's like the absolute most difficult experience of my life to watch a young child suffer, and them not to know why. Take me out of there. We can do whatever and experience whatever. But to see my boy suffer the way he did really, really tore at me. And from the first point ever, it became abundantly clear to me as I'm with him he's in the ICU. It's in the ICU where at Seattle Children's just had that. We just had that massive, big surgery to remove the growth, a very big deal. And what became clear to me, Charlie, was I was of no value, zero value to that boy, the rest of my children, or my family. And it became absolutely clear, crystal clear, that the only place that was going was towards an early grave. And if I said I loved all this, like I did, it was time to man up and to do something about And that's the point where I decided to no longer become a victim to my circumstance, to be defined by my adversity. At that point, I made that decision to go back to our foundational training in the military to embrace that current level of pain. But that time, my decision was to channel it in the proper direction and to act on it to improve my situation. And that's what's put me on a path to say, I'm not going to accept this life sentence that's been to me. You're on these 13 medications. You have these 33 different diagnoses and behavioral issues and psychological issues and cognitive issues. I was like, I don't care about any of that anymore. I'm going to do 3 things. 1, I'm going to return to the man of my pre-injury status. 2, I'm going to find a way to come off all this medication. And as soon as those 2 were accomplished, and I was going to accomplish them, the 3rd thing was I was going to devote the rest of my life to turning around and helping others who were in the exact same situation that I was in. And that put me on a new path, a new course, a new way of thinking, a new mode of being. And that's where I went out and started to look for alternative modalities, alternative therapies, and I signed up and I went through them all. And I didn't care if it cost me $2 million. It cost us a lot of money, bankrupt us, but I didn't care. So we're going to find a way out of it. We're going to find a way to get better. We're going to accomplish those things that we're going to accomplish. That way of thinking actually led me to Dr. Gordon. Dr. Gordon is a world-renowned neuroendocrinologist. I read an article about me and reached out and basically said, hey, Andrew, I've been in the field of neuroendocrinology. We've been treating TBI for a number of years. We've had everything we do is science and evidence-based. Here's some of the science. Here's some of the evidence. Here's some stuff that you can watch on it. Educate yourself. If you're interested, let me know, and I'll tell you how the process works. Watched a podcast that he was on, and at that point, I didn't even know what a podcast was. But I was like, okay, it sounds like some kind of space word. I was like, watch and hear a podcast. But what I'm hearing him talk about, he's like, listen, he brought a guy on there, a military guy who had a minor traumatic brain injury, a number of them. And he was basically, everything he was saying was what I was living. But Mark was able to say, this is why. And this is why we can assess this objectively. We have an advanced neuroendocrine panel, blood panel, looks at specific things in the brain, in the body. And it tells us what the body is actually doing today, right now. We don't have to look behind. We don't have to look at any of these other imaging. We can tell how the systems are running based off these unique biomarkers. Then we can, and by the way, I can look at those and I can tell you exactly to the T what your symptoms are and what that means for your life. And they were able to do that when they did my labs. But the really, what was just blew my mind was not only can we identify it objectively, we have a pretty robust and natural way to go about and do 2 things. 1, reduce that neurochronic inflammation, both in the brain and the body, and then 2, replace what we'll call neurosteroids back to their physiological levels. Now, we've all heard about things like hormones like testosterone, estrogen, and things like that. But what you need to know, and what is not widely known, because I guess it doesn't need to be, is we have hormones that are produced below the neck. We have hormones that are produced above the neck. Above the neck called neurosteroids. Now, these modulate communication and interactions in real time. The ones below the neck come from sending a signal from here to say the testicles, and that starts testosterone to be produced. Well, that kind of effect can take hours, but the neurosteroids, they operate in real time and inhibit or enable the intercellular communication. When that becomes interrupted, well, we see all these symptoms that I talked about earlier. So then we can become a very personalized, dialed-in treatment plan based solely on my unique physiological, biochemical individuality, so personalized medicine, and go treat those underlying conditions and those deficiencies or insufficiencies. Now, when that was applied to me, well, today I'm performing as good, if not better, than my pre-injury status. Wow. We started up our own organization the Warrior Angels Foundation, and today we've delivered that since 2015 to over 450 other individuals directly, and then indirectly people who've went out and gotten the care on their own, thousands. And we've replicated results just like mine hundreds and hundreds of times. And so that is the message that we're talking about here. The message is let's not guess. Let's be precise about it. Let's not guess, let's test. And that's the whole conversation about having. Let's do a proper assessment and a proper treatment protocol that's based solely on my unique needs, my personal needs, and that's personalized medicine. And that's been the underlying catalyst for me to now be where I'm at, where 2014, I basically thought I was done with life, to today, I've done my business training at both Stanford and Pepperdine Graduate Schools of Businesses. Been very successful with what we wanted to do with the foundation, with helping countless other people, with briefing this information to the Surgeon General of the Ministry of Defense in the UK, or talking to high-level officials here, or figuring out a way that we can actually scale this. We've trained over additional physicians in this advanced methodology since 2015. We wrote the book, and the book's turning into, the Quiet Explosions will come out this fall, all for the single strategy of educating other people who are suffering the same way that I was, but not just raising our hand and banging the drum about a bunch of awareness or a bunch of problems, although that's an important fourth step, to bring scientifically and evidence, viable evidence backed by science, those type of solutions that we could replicate, to the public. So, Charlie, that's been that journey, is going from that level to we'd lost everything, to making a decision to turn it around, to not care what the status quo had to say about it, to not care what specialists had to say about it, or what anybody else had to say about it, and to figure out a way to get better and to turn that around and to make it available to other people. So that's been that incredible journey. And if you're out there and you're saying, this sounds very similar to the rough patches that I have, I'm telling you, this is not my story. This is the story for a lot of us military individuals. And you don't just have to be a military or veteran to experience these things.
That's so fantastic. I mean, the recovery, and the fact that you have been able to replicate this, that it wasn't just an isolated incident, that this actually, by increasing and looking at your whole profile and understanding it's the hormonal imbalance, correct? That you're looking at that is being produced by the endocrine system, and getting that profile and then upgrading, increasing. Is it a shot? Is it something, that if I have a low testosterone, for example, and testosterone is connected to my libido and I have low libido, is it a shot that I get, or is it a combination of different hormones? If I was coming to you, what would I have to go through in order to get my profile done?
Yeah, so the right thing you want to do is you want to find a provider who is proficient in neuroendocrinology or treating traumatic brain injury hormonally. Now, I'll start this with saying, I'm not a doctor, so take that as worth. I'm just sharing my experience. Yeah. But this body is this delicate, symphony going on there. Now, we can identify that there is a deficiency in testosterone. I think what's more important would be to identify, why is there a deficiency in testosterone? And are there environmental considerations that we can put in play to optimize that without ever having to take any foreign substance? Mm-hmm. Now, if you have overwhelming damage to your hypothalamus and the pituitary, well, odds are it's not going to be able to stimulate those things and make testosterone in the way it's supposed to. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the difference from a lot of, you put testosterone in the body, it's going to cause some downstream and some upstream effects on those, because everything is that symphony. There's feedback loops. Mm-hmm. What we know is there's one thing that can potentially burn out, called DHEA, if that is not identified and supplemented correctly. So you can't just give somebody testosterone and then not properly monitor, observe the entire system and how that symphony is continuing to conduct itself. So that's where that personalized part of the medicine is so important. So what do you have to do? You have to get the proper assessments, and you have to do them routinely, and you have to have somebody who's competent. Now, you can find a lot of information on our website, waftbi.org, and you can link to our medical provider and all of his websites. And we have a wealth of content out there where you can educate yourself and actually find a provider that's probably close to your geographical location, where you can get this level of care. And a lot of what we do today is virtual through telehealth. So virtually, in a very real terms, there is a way for you to receive this level of care. So like I said, we trained over 500 providers, and you can get that provider network through Dr. Gordon, our medical director's website, which you can find probably in our show notes, or our website, waftbi.org.
It's fantastic. Andrew, this has been such an incredible, I wish we could talk for another hour, because I think this is such important information for people to know, for veterans out there and their families who are struggling with TBI, that there is hope out there for them. And I think it's just, what a miracle. It's truly a miracle, sir. Thank you. Folks, can you stay just a couple minutes? I want to ask, I always end the shows with one last question. I'd love to have your input on that. But I do want to make sure that you recognize, folks, the incredible people that we are bringing on this series, all to help you out, all to give you the resources, the information that you need to overcome whatever it is may be, whether it's PTS, whether it's TBI, whether it's other injuries, sleep disturbance. Come to this program, this series, this Special Veteran Summit series that the Council has partnered up with for the Trauma Sensitive Awareness Foundation. It's a special 10-part series that's bringing information, hope, inspiration, and healing. We're exploring cutting-edge treatments and alternative therapies, hearing pioneering veterans and mental injury experts. We're finding hope for PTS, TBI, moral injury, sleep disturbance, family conflict, emotional trauma, and so much more. Part 2 debuts in November at www.t-saf.org. That's t-saf.org. I also want to do a quick shout out again to KUHS Denver. Thank you, Henry, and everybody here at KUHS. We are the stream broadcasting here in beautiful Colorado, all across this nation, all around the world. Thank you for tuning in to KUHS. We are growing exponentially, and it's because of you and your listenership all around the world that is making KUHS becoming one of the most important voices anywhere out there on the internet and traditional media. So thank you, folks. Andrew, sir, it has been an honor and a privilege to meet you and to hear your story and to be able to share it with all of us. And I would love for you, because you have had such a breadth of experience, real life experience. And one of the questions I always ask my guests before we close out the show is, if you could give one bit of advice, one bit of wisdom from your life experience, what would it be?
It's a tough one, Charlie. I think I would say that history shows that we as humans have the ability to elevate our internal state to be greater than our external circumstances and environment. And if you can remember that and apply yourself to the best of your ability, things are going to work out the way that they're supposed to.
It's fantastic. Andrew, sir, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us today on the show. Folks,
It's my honor.
We are, the council is adjourned. We will be back next week. We've got another amazing guest that's going to be on the show. You want to tune in next Friday, September 11th, for our next show. May you all be well. May you all be free of pain and suffering. May you all be whole. God bless everyone. We will see you next Friday.